Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and get started with the Unit 1, Section 1 notes. So this is the very first video in Pre-Algebra A. And in this section, we're going to be talking about integers. And this is something you may have studied before. So some of it may be review, but some of it may be new. And integers are really a foundation for all that we do in pre-algebra. So it's super important that you take careful notes and listen carefully. Anytime you need to pause the video, feel free, but make sure you have exactly what I'm writing on the screen on your paper. You can also go back and rewatch these videos at any time. So let's get to it. Alrighty, so the first section, it says graph the integers on a number line, then write the numbers in order from least to greatest. So here are our number lines for number 1 and number 2. We're going to graph these integers, and these integers are really just whole numbers that are either negative or positive. So in the first example, all of our integers are negative, and if we think about a number line, our greatest integer, negative 20 here, is going to be the furthermost to the left, because it's the furthest from 0. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that there. And then I'm just going to look to see what might come next. The next number is going to be negative 14. And so as you can see here, I'm getting closer to 0 as I have negative 20, negative 14, negative 13, negative 11, negative 9, and 7. And remember, these lines go on forever and ever in either direction. So somewhere over here is 0, and then there would be positive numbers. So again, that order would be negative 20, negative 14, negative 13, negative 11, negative 9, and negative 7. All right, let's go ahead and look at number 2. Again, I'm going to look for my greatest negative, which is going to be the furthermost to the left. So that looks like it's negative 30. Then I have negative 15, negative 5. Then there's a 0 there that's not listed, but I'm going to go ahead and put it there to help us. Then we have positive 10, positive 20, and positive 35. So again, those are the integers in order from least to greatest. Go ahead and make a note if you haven't already done so, that integers are whole numbers, and they can be both positive or negative. Okay, let's go ahead and look down here at 2 other definitions, which are going to be important. So when we think about absolute value means the distance an integer is from 0. Because absolute value is the distance, absolute value is always positive. And we'll look at a few examples here in a second. If you see 2 lines like this, that means absolute value. So the absolute value of 5 equals 5. The absolute value of negative 5 also equals 5. All right, so similar to absolute value, but a little bit different, are called integer opposites. And so the opposite of a negative is simply a positive. And the opposite of a positive is negative. So if I look here at this number line, which I've sort of written over, but we can still use it, the opposite of negative 5 would be 5. The opposite of negative 8 would be 8, and so forth. All right, so I'm going to look down here and state the absolute value of these numbers. And technically, we should have the absolute value sign on there, so I'm going to go ahead and add it for you. So the absolute value of 1 is 1. The absolute value of -9 is 9. The absolute value of 15 is 15. The absolute value of -12 is 12. Our next section wants us to look at the opposite. So again, the opposite of +14 would be -14. The opposite of -33 would be +33. The opposite of -24 is 24. The opposite of 81 is -81. All right, make sure you have those definitions for absolute value and opposites. If not, go ahead and pause it and make sure that you get those down correctly. All right, looking at page 2, we're now just going to use our greater than or less than symbols to compare these two integers. So I know that -9 is bigger than -11. 1 is bigger than -5. Here I have the absolute value. So remember, the absolute value of -15 is simply 15. And then we know that 15 is greater than 4. All right. Our next section is going to have us evaluate these expressions and come to an answer. So we have the absolute value of -32 plus the absolute value of -6. We know that is simply 32 plus 6, giving us an answer of 38. And try to get in the habit of boxing your answers. It just helps us be able to find your answer on the page and organize your work. So here, let's look at number 2. So it says the absolute value of -7. We know that's 7, but there's this negative sign outside of the absolute value. That doesn't go away. So we have -7 plus 12. That is in fact 5. Okay, the absolute value of 18 minus 4 is 14. Minus the absolute value of 9 minus 4, that's 5. So that is just 14 minus 5, which is simply 9. All right, we're going to do the same thing in the next two sections. However, now it's giving us a value for a variable. So it's telling us that x equals -7. Wherever you see an x, you have to write -7, not just +7. So here we have the opposite of -7. This negative sign here means opposite. So we have a double negative, but we know that within our absolute value bars, anything has to be positive. So my answer is just 7. So we have the absolute value of -7 plus 5, which is just 7 plus 5, giving us 12. Here I have 6 times the absolute value of -7, which is just 6 times 7, which is in fact 42. Okay, in our last section, we have 3 different variables: x equals -3, y equals 4, z equals 2. So I'm just going to plug those in just like I did in the previous section where we had just an x. So 2 times y, 2 times 4, minus the absolute value of -3. 2 times 4 is 8, minus the absolute value of -3 is 3. 8 minus 3 is 5. And if we look at number 2, I have the absolute value of 4 times 4 times 2 minus 3 times the absolute value of x, which is -3. So here I have 4 times 4, which is 16, times 2, which is 32, minus 3. The absolute value of -3 is simply 3. So this is 32 minus 9, which gives us 23 as our final answer. Okay, so make sure that you have everything in your notes. If you have any questions about this section, please be sure and ask your teacher. As I said, integer operations and knowing how integers work with absolute value and opposites is really, really key to everything we're going to do this year in pre-algebra. So thanks again for listening.